Hey, thank you for joining me again at the Love Fashionably podcast. I'm so excited to have you joining me this Monday night. This is going to be a part two episode from what we talked about last week. So if you haven't watched last week's, then you're more than welcome to still join me live, but you might be a bit lost. I'm going to catch us up really quick. We're going to just jump right in and try to get through and call it back up. So, we were talking about different storms that we encounter in life, whether it be like a health storm, a physical storm. We were talking about this because it just kind of brought back to my mind a story that I like and I've taken a lot of notes on from all of the hurricanes that we've been having over the past few weeks, and just seeing the devastation and then having friends that are in the path of the storm and talking with them. So it just kind of brought this story to mind. And so just kind of sharing that, but we know that there are lots of different types of storms. There's, financial storms that we deal with, there's storms that you may deal with your children, or as a young adult that you deal with your parents, teachers at school. There's just all different kinds of things. We're just kind of using this general word storm to basically cover any type of opposition or something that we encounter in our life that tends to slow us down. We were talking about a storm. That's kind of the number one sign is when we have that opposition coming against us. And we are looking at the story of Paul in Acts 27, where he is on a ship and he is heading to go stand trial because he is in chains for, in short, just preaching the gospel. And the society was not ready for that at that time. And so he is now a prisoner on a ship trying to get to where he's going. And they have encountered a storm at sea. And they're trying to get there, but things just aren't going their way. They've had to change ships. Paul has heard from an angel of the Lord that has told them that, hey, yes, we're going to make it, but we are going to be shipwrecked. And that is not the best news. We talked a little bit about last time about how that God will place people in our lives to give us, it could be a word of warning. That's what for here in like around verse 10, that's what Paul's giving the people in the ship. He's giving them a warning, not to create chaos and worry and anxiety within them, but to just kind of be like waving the flag, like, hey, this is coming. I'm trying to help you out. And then sometimes we have those voices in our lives that are voices of reason, are voices that kind of help keep us on the right path, or a word of advice because they've been through something similar. And sometimes those voices aren't always easy to hear because sometimes it means that it's going to cause some type of sacrifice for us in our lives. But we were talking about this one particular passage as we're working through Acts 27. And it's where we stopped last time. And I want to read it again because I have a lot of notes from this section. So like I had mentioned, I've kind of taken some notes on these verses over the years. And for this, I just kind of compiled them all together and then just sharing with you my thoughts about that. So let's pick back up in Acts 27 at verse 18 through 26. It says, "The next day, a gale force winds continued to batter the ship. The crew began throwing the cargo overboard. The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars, until at last all hope was gone. No one had eaten for a long time. Finally, Paul called the crew together and said, 'Men, you should have listened to me in the first place, and you would have avoided all this damage and loss. But take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. For last night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me. And he said, "Don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God, in his goodness, has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God, it will be just as he said. But we will be shipwrecked on an island." It's like, I just love how that like reads. It like just reads like such a beautiful story. It's like Paul's just giving all this good. It's like almost like you get like a word of like really good encouragement, and then it's like, but the tagline, but we're gonna be shipwrecked on an island. I just think that's so funny, the way it's put there. But that's what we were talking about. The voice that you believe will determine the way that you experience your reality. The voice you believe will determine what you experience. Are you listening to the word of God? Or are you listening to the word of the world? And how easy it is to just to steer by what we feel. I feel like that's really what society a lot of the time wants us to do. Um, Very easily, oh, just go with what you feel. No, like I'm not gonna go with what I feel. Like that's not gonna get me where I want to be. I'm gonna go by the truth, and I'm gonna go by the word that God's given me. Um, and then where we left last time is where, on this point, where sometimes we have those storms in our lives that a lot happen to us. And then there's some that we kind of put ourselves in. We get ourselves in bad spots in life. And we talked about how God's grace and mercy is greater than that. And so, picking up from there, kind of just as a clean slate, we can all have that clean slate, and we can have that clean slate every day. It says His mercies are new every morning. I don't know about you, but I'm so thankful for that. That no matter what the previous day had, we know that we can wake up with a fresh start with Him. And we talked about how a lot of the times it's us having to take that first step. God is always there. He always has an open line of communication, but we have to be the ones to take that first step to Him, towards Him, and to kind of open. We have to pick up the phone. It's like the phone line. Okay, this is going to make me sound old. But if you grew up with a landline and somebody called you and they had to come track you down, the phone's sitting on the table and it's an open line of communication, but you have to walk over there and pick it up. And that's really how it is with God, is like He has that open line of communication for us always to make the fresh start for us, but we have to pick up the phone and talk to Him. But kind of going back, there's some things here that we can learn. For Paul is in the middle of a storm, but he has a lot of confidence. And his confidence comes from who he knows that he is. Because he says there, he said, for I believe in God. And he said, remember if it's this passage or the one before, but he said that's who I serve. And so he knows who he is and whose he is, and he knows what voice to listen to, and that gives him the confidence. And what if we did those same things? If we focused not on the storm and not what we see, but if we focused on the future of what God has said and about what we know, Paul had a greater perspective. Yes, he had the confidence because it says that an angel came and stood beside him. I don't know. That would probably kind of freak me out if an literal angel came and stood beside me. I guess there would be a comfort and a peace, but also like your brain's processing, you're like, oh my gosh, like that's kind of scary. But for Paul, that was a very big comfort in such a time of distress. And he had his eyes focused, and he kept up his courage. So like fixing your focus, we've talked about that a lot, because I feel like that really does affect your reality and how you experience different things that you go through in life. Whether good or bad. If you have a bad perspective and you're going through something great, you're not going to experience it as great, or you're not going to get the full experience of it. So the ship's going down, but keep up your courage, because Paul's telling us that we have the faith to finish, to make it to the other side. And the thing is like we fix our faith, we put our faith in God, but we can control our courage. We can keep up our courage. It's something that we can control. We may not be able to fix the situation, but we can fix what the voice we're listening to. We can fix our focus on what we see, and we can fix our focus on the Word of God, the truth of God, and we can keep up our courage. And so not looking at it as what it is, but what God sees, getting a heavenly perspective. So many times we want God to stop the storm, and He doesn't always do that, because He's wanting you to fix your focus in the middle of the storm, and not to focus on the fear, because fear is empowered by our focus. What you're focused on, what you're thinking about, is how fearful you are. And faith is also powered by your focus. So that's why having a perspective, not maybe of what you feel, but what you know to be true, determines how you experience different situations in life, whether it's good or bad. And so, kind of moving on to the last part of Paul's story in this chapter. So I'm just it's a few verses, but I think we're gonna read through a lot of it just to kind of give us like a little wrap up of where they're at. But so we know it says that they dropped a weighted line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. Then they keep going. I'll kind of condense this a little bit so we can get to the next part as well. But it says, then later they found it was only 90 feet. So they can tell the water's going down. They're getting very nervous about what's going to happen. So they throw out the anchors. And they're praying for daylight. They're just, it's like one of those really desperate moments. And so basically, kind of full freak out mode. Like they're like, this is not going as we planned. This is getting worse by the minute. And it says, but Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, you will all die unless the sailors stay aboard. So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks, he said. Please eat something now for your own good. Again, Paul, he had a word. He knew what was coming. So he's trying to be that word of wisdom, that word of advice in the middle of this very dire time. It says, for not a hair on your heads will perish. Then he took some of the bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat. It says, all 276 of us who were on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the cargo of wheat overboard. It says, when the morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and let them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders, raised by a foresail, and headed toward shore, but they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship struck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape, but the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to planks and debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to shore. So as we can see here, looking back, we can see that Paul was exactly right. Everything that he had told them, everything he warned them happened. That they wouldn't lose their lives, that they were going to be shipwrecked. They were going to lose everything that they had with them, but it was going to be okay in the end. And so when you ignore that warning that God sends, you may suffer loss. And then again, these are just some of my notes. So I just want to kind of read some of these off. But it says, what was guiding you is gone. So, do you lose hope or do you believe the word of God? When they were losing everything. Like they're on the ship. It's like the Titanic. It's going down. Everything is going overboard. The ship is falling apart. It's like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to lose hope? Or are you going to believe the word of God? Because the word of God was spoken over them. So they could know and believe. They had the option to believe Paul and the word that was spoken over them. That, okay, we're going down. That's fine. We're going to be shipwrecked. We're going to an island. Like, we're going to be safe. Or do you lose hope and become afraid and full of fear and worry and anxiety? Again, that's where it comes back to fix your focus and keeping up your courage. What are you focusing on? What perspective are you believing? Your hope doesn't have to be in the boat. But so many times when the worst comes for us, we have those what if thoughts. And that worst case scenario starts to play out and we start to think and we go just down in a hole, just thinking about it. But I love what Joyce Meyer always says. She says, worry is a down payment on a problem you may never have. And that's what those what if questions really bring for us. Sometimes maybe they do play out. But what if it does? God would still be there at the bottom. I loved this quote. I heard this one time. It says that worry has babies. like you have that one worry thought, and then you have like a million worry thoughts afterwards. Like it just multiplies one thing after another, and it just creates this thought process that it really creates like a storm within a storm. We talked about last time about Milton. What was so bad about it was the storms that they didn't see coming, the tornadoes that were the spinoffs, what created such an overall like just bad storm in the south of Florida. And then a lot of time that's what happens in life is when those storms that come that we don't expect. Again, like not fixing your focus on the pounding. It says that the shore continued to pound the boat, but fixing your focus on the promise, the word of God that was spoken over them. And it says, my faith is not in how it would happen, but my faith is in the God who said that it would happen. So, a lot of times our faith is wrapped up in the way that we want it to happen. We want it to happen in a certain way. So anytime it doesn't happen that way, that's when we get frustrated. There's kind of like this, I kind of call it like an expectation gap where we want things to happen and look a certain way, and then God has it happen a certain other way, and that's when we become really frustrated. But to kind of wrap up Paul's story here, we're going to end here in Acts 28. With just the first 10 verses here. So we can kind of, it does have like a little bit of a feel-good ending. So don't worry. Paul's last word there at the last one was like, don't worry, we're going to escape, but we're going to shipwreck. No, he doesn't end there. It says, once we were safe on shore, we learned that we were on an island in Malta. The people of the island were very kind to us. It was cold and rainy, so they built a fire on the shore to welcome us. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, bit him on the hand. The people of the island saw it hanging from his hand and said to each other, a murderer, no doubt. Though he escaped the sea, justice will not permit him to live. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and was unharmed. The people waited for him to swell up or suddenly drop dead. Great friends. But when they had waited a long time, he saw that he wasn't harmed. They changed his mind. It says, near the shore where he landed was an estate belonging to, I don't know how you say this right, Publius? We're going to go with it. Kind of like Publix, but not really. So he's the chief official of the island. He welcomed us and treated us kindly for 3 days. As it happened, his father was ill with fever. It says Paul went in and prayed for him and laid his hands on him. He healed him. Then all the other sick people on the island came and were healed. As a result, we were showered with honors. These are prisoners showered with honors. And when the time came to sail, people supplied us with everything we would need for the trip. What an ending to Paul's story. Some things about that is when we get to the island or we get to the place where God has us, as we're going through a storm and we may become shipwrecked, but as we get to where we're supposed to be, God will have people there waiting for us to give us all of the supplies and what we need to kind of help fulfill that purpose. It says, I just wrote this down, like what if this storm was all about putting Paul on the island because God had some people that he wanted to heal? If the ship hadn't gone through a storm, hadn't been a shipwreck, Paul wouldn't have ended up on this particular island, and all of those people would not have been healed. Maybe God had a bigger plan and a purpose, and sometimes we don't always see that when those storms come, when we face that opposition, because we want, like we've talked about, we want the easy way out, but that's not it. When we look back at the storms that we encounter in our life, we often have a clearer vision of probably why they happen. While they might not always be easy, but we can learn lessons from them. We can learn how to handle it better in case we face one similar to that, or we see someone else that isn't going through a storm like that. We can have words of wisdom and help be their guide in times of that. Kind of going back to where it was talking about Paul shook the snake into the fire. We talked about that a little bit different a few weeks ago, and I wanted to bring a new perspective about this because I was thinking about it, and, when you get to the other side of the storm, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of your troubles are over. We see that, yes, Paul shipwrecked, he is still a prisoner, he is still in chains, and now he has a snake attached to his arm. I would be in panic. I would probably just die right there. It wouldn't have had to attach itself to me. I would have looked at it and we would have been over. But it just shows that, his troubles aren't over, and it just means that those little storms, those little things don't really bother him anymore. He was just like, this too. Like he had a bigger perspective. He was able to see clearly. He had his focus fixed on what really mattered and a greater purpose. And he knew that he still had some things to do. And we're getting close. Oh no, we're almost done. Just hang with me here, right here at the end. Because when you get to the place you were going, like we said, God will have people there. He always provides. And yes, just because Paul did all these great things, he wasn't freed. He had to continue on his journey. Like we said, however, he honestly doesn't seem too upset about it. He's just like, okay, so here we go. This is what we're going to do. And so a lot of the times it doesn't take us long to think of someone that's gone through a tragedy. Here in the state of Alabama, I think the whole state has been watching the story of Lulu this summer. And a lot of the times what we find is when people go through storms of severe tragedy, their perspective is always so much greater, and it's always such an encouragement. So I encourage you this week to look for those stories, to have a bigger perspective, to not look at those storms of life as what you may feel about them. But remember, it's about the truth and the word that God has given you, and to look for those people that God may have placed in your life to be a word of advice or a word of wisdom. But always put his word first above anything. His word is truth, it is pure, and it will always lead you in the right path. So we see Paul ended. I told you he had a happy ending, sort of, kind of. I mean, it's a little bit better than a shipwreck, right? But he did get to help some people. So I hope that this story encouraged you. Again, if you missed the first part of this, check out last week's. You can find it at on YouTube at the BGTV Studios page, and you can see the archive there. As always, a big thank you to BGTV Studios for hosting our podcast each and every week. We are a podcast network of episodes that are happening and airing all throughout the week, so be sure to check out bgtvstudios.com and join me again next Monday night. See ya.